My name is Sabrina Lane. I'm 27 years old, and last night I walked out of my own engagement dinner without saying a word. Right now, I'm sitting on my living room floor, still wearing the green satin dress I spent weeks saving up for. My heels are somewhere by the front door. My phone is face down on the rug, silent since I turned it off an hour ago. The mascara has dried on my cheeks. But my mind? Still racing. It was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. I met Nathan Caldwell 3 years ago at a sustainable housing symposium in Raleigh. He was a guest speaker, charismatic, confident, with that quiet southern charm that made every woman in the room lean in just a little closer. I was there representing my small but determined urban planning team, fresh off my first major project. We talked during a coffee break and ended up skipping the closing ceremony to walk along the waterfront, trading stories about architecture and cities and childhood dreams. I told him about how I grew up helping my dad fix broken porch railings and drawing tiny floor plans in the margins of my notebooks. He told me he admired women who built things with their own hands. He was the first man who made me feel like my ambition wasn't something I had to tone down. He wanted to know everything: how I paid for college working nights at the campus print shop, how I used to draw my future house every year on my birthday. He made me feel seen. Nathan came from money, old Charleston money. His family owned law firms, properties, social influence. His mother, Margot, sat on boards and threw garden parties that made the local paper. His father, Charles, had a name you didn't say lightly in the southern real estate circuit. Me? My mom's a retired nurse. My dad still paints houses. We don't own property. We rent and save and stretch. Still, for 3 years, Nathan made me believe that love could bridge that gap. He told me it didn't matter, that I was everything he wanted. 2 weeks ago, he proposed on the steps of an old lighthouse during our weekend trip to Tybee Island. It was perfect. Quiet. Intimate. I cried. Said yes. The ring was a square-cut sapphire with tiny diamonds on either side. Classic, elegant, and, knowing Nathan, probably worth more than my car. I floated for days after that. Then came last night, the official engagement dinner. His parents hosted it at the Baudelaire, a French colonial restaurant where the chandeliers glowed like crystal wine. I had never set foot inside a place like that. Everyone was dressed like they were walking into a scene from a magazine. I wore my best dress, the emerald satin one that hugged my waist just right, and borrowed pearl earrings from my best friend because I didn't want to look out of place. I told myself it would be fine. I'd met Charles and Margot before. They weren't warm, but they weren't overtly cruel. Margot was always restrained. The kind of woman who compliments your lipstick while mentally calculating how much you paid for it. But Nathan was there. He held my hand under the table when I got nervous, squeezed it when the waiter poured champagne, and then, somewhere between the duck confit and the dessert menu, everything turned. Margot set down her wine glass and looked straight at me with a smile so sharp it could have sliced glass. "Well," she said, lifting her eyebrows ever so slightly. "Before we all get too swept away in romance, I do hope Nathan has learned from his father's mistakes. We wouldn't want another urban planner situation on our hands." The table froze. Nathan stiffened beside me. "Mother," Margot waved a manicured hand. "Oh, don't act surprised. I'm simply saying we all remember how disastrous it was when your father had that little indiscretion with that woman from the zoning commission. What was her name again? Never mind. The point is, these things have a way of repeating if one isn't careful." The words hit me like ice water. Did she just compare me to the woman who almost broke up her marriage? I blinked, waiting, hoping for Nathan to speak, to push back, to say, "Enough." But he didn't. He laughed. A soft, strained little chuckle, like he didn't know what else to do. It might have been nerves. It might have been habit. But it wasn't a defense. And in that moment, everything in me shattered. I looked around the table. His father sipped his wine, indifferent. His cousin smirked. His sister avoided my eyes. Only I sat there, heart thudding, hands trembling in my lap. So I did the only thing I could. I slipped the ring off my finger, gently, silently, placed it beside Nathan's plate. The sound of metal on china seemed to echo through the room. "Sabrina," Nathan said, finally understanding. But I was already standing. I picked up my purse, smoothed the front of my dress, walked past the waiter carrying a bottle of red, past the coat check, past the valet who blinked in confusion when I stepped onto the sidewalk with no coat, no companion, no explanation. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I walked, one foot in front of the other, head held high, and I didn't look back. It's been 20 hours since I walked out of that restaurant, and I haven't slept. Not really. I lay in bed most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of the dinner, every word, every silence. Especially his silence. Around 10 this morning, someone knocked on my door. At first, I didn't move. I didn't want to see anyone, certainly not Nathan. But the knocking didn't stop, so I got up, pulled on a cardigan, and opened the door. There he was, standing in yesterday's suit, shirt slightly wrinkled, the top button undone. His hair a mess like he'd run his hands through it 100 times. In one hand, the sapphire ring and its velvet box. In the other, a bouquet of white lilies and forget-me-nots. "Sabrina," he said, voice low, hoarse like he hadn't slept either. "Please, just hear me out." I said nothing, just stepped aside. He entered slowly, like the air inside my apartment was heavier than the one outside. I crossed my arms, sat on the arm of my sofa. I wasn't going to make this easy. "I know last night was a disaster," he began. "My mother was completely out of line. She had no right to say what she said. I didn't know she was going to bring that up." "But she did," I said, my voice quiet. "And you let her." He looked down. I froze. I didn't know what to say. "You laughed," I said. He flinched. "It was nervous. I swear it wasn't because I agreed with her. I didn't want to escalate things. You know how she gets, cold, calculating. I didn't want to blow up the whole night." "So you chose her comfort over my dignity?" His eyes met mine, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see charm. I saw fear, shame, weakness. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have stood up for you. I should have shut her down the second she opened her mouth." "But you didn't," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "And that tells me everything I need to know." He stepped closer. "No, it doesn't. Sabrina, I love you. I proposed because I want to spend my life with you. I don't care what my mother thinks. She's stuck in her own bitterness. You're not her. You're nothing like her. I know that." I raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" "Of course I do." "Then why has she been calling my old professors? Why did the board of a local housing trust I was just accepted into call me this morning and tell me my character references were being questioned?" He froze. "What?" "She's digging," I said, trying to discredit me. "And what terrifies me is not just that she's doing it, but that I don't think you'd have ever told me if I hadn't found out first." He sat down heavily in the armchair across from me. His face had gone pale. "I didn't know." I believed him, but it didn't make me feel better. "What if we got married, Nathan?" I asked. "What happens then? Every holiday, every family gathering? Am I supposed to smile while your mother whispers that I'm some city-climbing seductress? What happens when we have kids? Will she look at them and see her mistake multiplied?" "She'll come around." "No," I said, my voice firm now. "She won't. And that's not the issue." He looked up, confused. "The issue is you," I said quietly. "You didn't protect me. Not even when it was easy. Not even when I needed you most." He looked like he'd been punched. "I don't know how to undo that," he said finally. "Tell me what to do. I'll do anything." I wanted to tell him. I wanted to hand him a map back to me. But I didn't have one. Because this wasn't about a single night. This was about the pattern. The history I hadn't wanted to see. The times he deferred to her opinion over mine. The subtle comments she made that he brushed off. The way he told me, more than once, she doesn't mean it like that. But she did. And deep down, he knew it. We sat in silence for a long time. The flowers drooped slightly in his hand. The ring box lay untouched on the coffee table between us. Finally, He stood. I'm going to talk to her. Really talk. She can't treat you this way. And if she won't apologize, we'll postpone everything. Push the wedding back. I'll make this right. You can try, I said, but I'm not waiting. And I'm not going back into that house unless I'm respected. Fully, not tolerated, not pitied, respected. He nodded, eyes glassy. Understood. He left after that, the door closing with a quiet click. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the flowers, at the box, at the life I thought I was building. I had loved him, but now I wasn't sure if I trusted him. And love without trust is just a beautiful room with no foundation. It looks like a home, but one storm and it crumbles. 3 days have passed since Nathan left my apartment, and I've been drifting between clarity and confusion like a tide that won't settle. I went back to work, pretended everything was fine, smiled at my colleagues, graded papers during lunch breaks, and answered emails like my world wasn't quietly unraveling beneath the surface. But when the classroom emptied and the noise subsided, I sat alone at my desk, staring at nothing. On Wednesday, an envelope arrived at the office with no return address. Inside was a single printed page. It was a photo, Margot, and a man I didn't recognize. They were walking side by side through what looked like a vineyard, their hands brushing. The timestamp read, May 2019. The man, based on the watermark in the lower corner, was identified by a discreet PI firm I'd heard of before, usually hired by suspicious spouses and corporate executives trying to dig up dirt. No note, no explanation, just the photo. At first, I didn't want to believe it meant what I thought it meant, but deep down, I knew. That man wasn't Charles. That smile on Margot's face wasn't one she reserved for dinner parties or charitable auctions. It was soft, intimate. She'd had an affair. I stared at the photo for hours that night, wondering if Nathan knew, if Charles knew, if this was common knowledge in some quiet corner of their world, swept under a rug too expensive to lift. And then a darker question crept in. Was this what Margot saw in me? A mirror? A younger woman reminding her of her own shame? Was I simply collateral in her private war with herself? That night, I didn't sleep. By Thursday morning, I had made a decision. I sent a message to someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Melissa Dunn. She was a former colleague at the urban planning firm where I interned fresh out of grad school. She now worked in Charlotte with a city development project I deeply admired. We met for coffee that afternoon. I heard about the engagement, she said as we sat down, her eyes kind but curious. Congratulations, or not? Not, I said simply. She nodded, understanding more than I'd said aloud. I handed her the envelope. I need to know if you've seen this man before. She examined the photo for a long time before her eyes widened slightly. Oh my God, that's Martin Fisk. He used to sit on the State Housing Advisory Board, didn't he? I nodded. And he was close to the Caldwells? Very, she said. Rumor was Margot helped him secure funding for a private project years ago that conveniently benefited her husband's firm. And just like that, the pieces began to click together. It wasn't just personal, it was political. Margot had secrets, real ones. And she was terrified I might one day uncover them, not because I was a threat to her son, but because I could be a threat to the image she built, the perfect family, the pristine reputation. And she had tried to ruin me first. I didn't know what to do with the information yet, but for the first time in days, I didn't feel helpless. I felt awake. When I got home that night, Nathan was waiting by my building. He looked nervous, like a man preparing to step into fire. I talked to her, he said. And it didn't go well. I figured, I replied. She doubled down, said she was protecting the family, that you're ambitious and clever, and that women like you don't end up in families like ours without motive. I raised an eyebrow. So I'm dangerous now? He exhaled. I think she's scared of you. She should be. He stared at me. You've changed. No, Nathan, I've just stopped pretending. He followed me inside and I let him. We sat at my tiny kitchen table surrounded by unpaid utility bills, a half-finished sketch of a community garden layout, and a wilting houseplant I kept forgetting to water. He looked around like it was the first time he saw the life I lived. the one he claimed to want. "She's not going to stop," he said. "She'll keep digging. She's already spoken to board members at the Caldwell Foundation. She's trying to paint you as unstable. She can try. But I want you to know, I've submitted my resignation." That stopped me. "From the firm?" He nodded. "I'm joining a different practice, smaller, independent, nothing tied to the family. I should have done it years ago." I looked at him. Really looked. There was weariness in his face, but also something new. A break in the polish. A crack in the mask. "I'm proud of you," I said softly. "I'm not doing this for them," he said. "I'm doing it for me. And maybe for a second chance." I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know how to give him that answer yet. The truth was, I wasn't the same woman who said yes at the lighthouse. I had seen something in him that night at the restaurant. Something small but undeniable. A hesitation, a flicker of agreement, and I wasn't sure if I could ever unsee it. Still, I poured us both coffee and sat down across from him. "I don't know where we go from here," I said, "but I know I won't go back to being small." "You never were," he said. But I was too blind to see it. The city lights glowed outside the window behind him. My hands wrapped around the mug. And for the first time since this all began, I felt the scales tipping. Not in his favor, not in mine, but toward something new. Something uncharted. Something honest. The following week felt like a balancing act between two realities. One in which Nathan and I cautiously began speaking again, and another where Margot Caldwell was actively trying to erase my credibility from every circle she could reach. I found out through a mutual contact that she'd inquired, discreetly of course, whether I had any questionable affiliations with city lobbyists. The phrasing alone was venom dressed in silk. What she didn't know was that I had already started gathering my own set of allies. Melissa connected me with a quiet but brilliant woman named Rena McAllister, an ethics officer who had once been blindsided by Margot in a funding review dispute and never forgot the sting. Rena had records, emails, memos, dates, everything that showed a history of manipulation, favoritism, and in some cases, outright coercion. Not enough to send anyone to jail, but more than enough to destroy the pristine narrative Margot had cultivated for decades. But I didn't want revenge. Not yet. I wanted truth and control. So I did something that surprised even me. I called Margot. She didn't answer. But an hour later, her assistant emailed me an appointment confirmation. Afternoon tea at the exclusive Charleston Club, members only. She still had to maintain appearances. I wore a simple navy blue sheath dress and flats. No jewelry, no makeup beyond a touch of mascara. I wanted to look like myself, not a version of me she could twist into a threat. Margot arrived 15 minutes late in a pale beige silk blouse and a white linen skirt that likely cost more than my monthly rent. Her eyes narrowed as she took me in. "You wanted to speak," she said coolly as the waiter poured tea. "So speak." "I know about Martin Fisk," I said simply. Her hand froze mid-stir. I saw it. The flicker of fear behind her lashes. The subtle drop of her jaw before she composed herself again. "I don't know what you're insinuating," she said. Too quickly. "I'm not insinuating," I replied. "I'm confirming. I have a photo. You in Napa Valley, May 2019. Arm in arm with a man who, at the time, sat on a zoning board that voted on a project your husband's firm later purchased under a third-party holding." Silence. Heavy. Measured. She set her spoon down slowly, deliberately. "What do you want?" she asked. "Nothing you can give me," I said. "I'm not here for hush money. I'm not here to threaten you. I just want you to understand one thing. Every time you try to bury me, I will rise with the shovel." Her lips pressed together, but I saw the shake in her hand. "You think you're strong now," she said softly. "Because you found a weakness in me." "No," I said. "I've always been strong, but now I have clarity." We didn't speak for another full minute. Finally, she looked up and said something I didn't expect. "I hated you the moment I met you," she said, her voice flat. "Not because you were poor. Not because you were ambitious. because you reminded me of who I could have been if I'd walked away. There it was. The truth. Margot had stayed, had played the part, had compromised until she no longer recognized the woman in her own mirror. And seeing me, standing tall, unbought, unbroken, made her feel everything she couldn't admit to herself. Pity. Regret. Resentment. I stood. Whatever this is, I said, it ends here. You stay out of my life, and I stay out of yours. But if you come for me again, I promise you, you'll regret it. She didn't respond. I walked away. The next day, Nathan came by my apartment again. He had quit the firm, moved out of his family's guest house, signed a lease on a small 2-bedroom apartment across town. I'm trying, he said. Not just for you. For me. And I believed him. We started seeing each other again. Slowly, carefully. No grand gestures, no declarations, just real difficult conversations about loyalty, about failure, about what it meant to protect someone not with words but with action. But even as things grew quieter on the surface, I knew the storm wasn't over. Because people like Margot don't accept loss. They simmer. They wait. And somewhere deep down, I knew she wasn't done. Not yet. 2 weeks passed. For the first time in months, my apartment didn't feel like a bunker. It felt like a place to exhale. Nathan and I weren't together exactly. We were rebuilding something new from the ground up, not rushing toward a ring or a date. Just honesty, distance, and the fragile beginnings of something possibly real. And then, one morning, I walked into my office and found a sealed envelope waiting on my desk. No return address, no name. Inside were copies of emails, 3 years old. They were from me to a zoning committee I had worked with early in my career. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw the annotation scrawled in red pen across the top. Exhibit A, pattern of coercion and inappropriate influence. My hands turned cold. Someone was compiling a case against me. I read through the rest, edited snippets from past emails, pulled from public archives, taken wildly out of context. In one, I'd offered to expedite a draft in exchange for a promised meeting date. Standard protocol in project planning, completely above board. But here, twisted into something it wasn't. Then I saw the watermark on the bottom corner of the paper. Caldwell Foundation Legal Counsel. I froze. Margot had escalated. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was preparation. She was building a legal case to block me from any future public planning contracts tied to their network. And in Charleston, that meant nearly all of them. I texted Melissa, sent photos of the documents. She didn't reply right away, but when she did, her message was short. She's trying to blacklist you, quietly, but I know someone who can help. That someone was Samuel Webb, an ethics consultant and former federal zoning investigator who'd retired early and made it his hobby to go after people like Margot. People who manipulated cities behind closed doors. People who believed power made them untouchable. I met him that same week in a small corner cafe that smelled like dust and espresso. He didn't say much at first, just listened as I explained everything. My background, the dinner, the smear attempts, the old photos, and now this. When I finished, he sat back and said, "She picked the wrong planner." That afternoon, he filed a formal inquiry to the State Municipal Ethics Committee, citing multiple breaches, improper influence attempts, and, most damningly, illegal interference in the public sector by a private family trust. That was when things began to crack. Not for me. For them. 3 days later, word spread that the Caldwell Foundation had been temporarily suspended from 2 upcoming state bids. Whispers followed. Then headlines. The press didn't name me, but they didn't have to. Anyone who'd been watching knew. And suddenly, I wasn't just the woman who walked out of an engagement dinner. I was the woman who'd stood up to one of Charleston's most powerful families. That night, Nathan showed up at my door again. Not frantic, not angry, just quiet. He stood there in the doorway, hands in his pockets, and said, "I want to talk, but I don't want to defend them." "Then come in," I said. We sat on the floor, just like we used to when we were younger. before the world got heavy with expectations and names with weight. "I didn't know about the emails," he said. "Swear to God, but I should have known she wouldn't stop." I looked at him. "Would you have said anything if you had?" He didn't answer right away. Then he whispered, "I don't know." That broke something in me, because I had hoped he'd changed more than that. "I think you love me," I said. "But I think you still love your place in that world more." He looked up and there was no denial in his eyes. "I want to be better," he said. "You might have to be alone to figure out what that means," I replied. We didn't fight. We didn't cry. We just sat in silence. Two people who had wanted the same life once, but had grown in different directions while chasing it. And I realized then that sometimes the biggest heartbreak doesn't come from betrayal or cruelty. It comes from watching someone you love stay small when you've worked so hard to grow. It's strange how quickly silence can turn into power. Since the inquiry into the Caldwell Foundation became public, no one from their side had dared contact me. Not Nathan, not Charles, not even Margot. Until now. Late one afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Sabrina." The voice was smooth, familiar, measured. It was Margot. I didn't say a word. "I'd like to meet," she continued. "Somewhere neutral. I believe we have unfinished business." I almost laughed. Unfinished business? That woman had tried to dismantle my life with the precision of a surgeon and the coldness of a judge. But I said yes. We met at a public park. Open, sunlit, impossible to manipulate. Margot arrived in an all-black pantsuit and flats like she'd abandoned pretense but not control. She looked tired, not in the way women look after a long day, in the way people look when the life they've built is beginning to fray at the seams. "I'll be direct," she said, sitting across from me at a weather-worn wooden table. "The ethics board has turned into a media circus. They're digging into matters that have nothing to do with you now. They've subpoenaed documents I never thought would resurface." I didn't flinch. I didn't make them dig. I just stopped letting you bury me. She gave a bitter smile. "You're smarter than I thought." "No," I said, calm. "You just thought everyone without your money was harmless." She exhaled slowly, then pulled something out of her purse. A small navy velvet box. She slid it across the table. I didn't touch it. "That's not the Caldwell heirloom ring," she said. "It's mine. From before. My grandmother's. The only thing I kept when I married Charles." I stared at her, unblinking. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I think you're going to need your own armor," she said. "Not a gesture of peace, a warning. There will be backlash. Not from me, from others. Men with deeper pockets than Charles. Friends we've had for decades. They don't like disruption. They don't like women like you." I finally opened the box. Inside was a simple antique ring, a thin platinum band, a deep oval-cut garnet. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud. It was resilient. "Why are you really doing this?" I asked, meeting her eyes. She hesitated. For the first time since I'd met her, Margot Caldwell hesitated. "Because I see what I became," she said quietly. "And I don't want you to let this family, this world, do to you what it did to me." I closed the box. "I won't." When I returned home, I placed the garnet ring in the same drawer as Cynthia's sapphire pendant, the one she'd given me after telling me her own story of losing herself. It felt like the beginning of something new. A strange solidarity among women who'd been silenced, reshaped, and worn thin by the same system. But I wasn't done yet. That weekend, I was invited to speak at a city planning summit, an opportunity that just 6 months ago would have gone to someone from the Caldwell orbit. The invitation alone was proof the tide was turning. I spoke about resilience and development, about designing cities not just for beauty, but for dignity, about planning spaces that allowed people to breathe, to grow, to stay. And when I stepped off the stage, I felt it. A small round of applause that wasn't just for my ideas, it was for my voice, for standing, for staying true. That night, Nathan texted. He'd seen the live stream. said he was proud, said, "You were always meant for more than them." I stared at the message for a long time, and then I deleted it, because the woman he once loved would have replied. But I wasn't her anymore, and maybe for the first time in my life, that wasn't a tragedy. It was a triumph. It had been 6 months since the engagement dinner, the night everything cracked open. 6 months since I slipped the sapphire ring onto the table and walked out, heels clicking against marble tile, heart hammering but spine straight. And now, just when the dust had finally settled, Nathan stood at my door again. Not with flowers, not with a ring, with a letter. "Can I come in?" he asked, voice calm, but softer than I remembered. Older, maybe, less sure of himself. I stepped aside. He handed me the envelope without a word and waited as I opened it. Inside was a printed letter of resignation, his final severance from the Caldwell Foundation, signed and notarized. Attached was a formal complaint he had submitted to the family legal board, detailing Margot's use of foundation resources for personal vendettas. And on the last page, a letter to me, handwritten. I sat down. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor. I read in silence. He wrote about everything. About how he'd spent months in therapy, confronting the fact that he'd never truly formed his own spine, only borrowed the confidence of others. About how he realized he'd always confused love with performance, loyalty with silence. About how he now understood that love wasn't just what he felt for me. It was what he failed to do when it mattered. I let someone else's version of power shrink you, and I can't undo that. I can only promise never to do it again. To anyone. Ever. I folded the letter. He finally looked up. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "Not another chance, not forgiveness. I just needed you to know I didn't forget. And I didn't move on without changing." It hit me then. How much lighter he looked. Like someone who had finally peeled off the skin that didn't fit. "You have changed," I said. "But so have I." He smiled. A real one. Sad. Accepting. "I know." We sat in the quiet for a while. There was no tension, no unfinished sentence hanging in the air. Just two people who had once loved deeply and wounded each other quietly. And maybe, in another timeline, that would have been enough to bring them back together. But not in this one. "I kept thinking," he said, "that if I did enough, quit the firm, exposed the truth, stood up to my family, that maybe it would be enough to fix it. But I get it now. You're not something to win back. You were never a prize. You were the truth. And I just wasn't ready for it." I looked at him and realized there was no anger left in me, just memory. "I used to believe love was about choosing someone," I said. "But now I think it's also about choosing yourself, and trusting the right person will honor that, not ask you to shrink for it." He nodded slowly, as if memorizing the shape of that sentence. Then he stood. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. He placed the letter gently on the edge of my coffee table and said, "Take care of yourself, Sabrina." "I already am," I replied. "For the first time, I really am." And when he walked out, I didn't watch him go. I didn't need to, because I wasn't the girl who walked away anymore. I was the woman who kept walking. It's been 9 months since the dinner at the Baudelaire. 9 months since the laugh. 9 months since the quiet walk out that felt like a funeral for a life I thought I wanted. I now live in a small cottage on the edge of West Ashley. Nothing extravagant, but it's mine. It has a porch with chipped railings I fixed myself, shelves full of planning books and tea jars, and windows that let the sun in without asking permission. There's a small garden out back where I grow rosemary and thyme, and one stubborn tomato vine that refuses to quit. Sometimes I sit on that porch in the early evening, barefoot, a mug of chamomile in my hands, and I wonder, what if I had stayed? What if I had laughed too? What if I had chosen comfort over dignity? But the truth is, I didn't walk away from love. I walked toward it, toward the version of myself I hadn't yet met, the one who doesn't wait to be chosen, the one who doesn't perform worthiness, the one who doesn't lower her voice just to make someone else more comfortable. Nathan and I haven't spoken since that day. I didn't block his number. I just didn't need to use it. Sometimes closure doesn't come in a final conversation or an apology. Sometimes it comes in the silence that follows. In the morning, you wake up and realize he's not the first thing on your mind anymore. In the walk to work where your chest doesn't ache. In the laughter you don't have to force. In the version of you that no longer needs fixing. The city has changed for me too. I recently accepted a position as lead consultant for a regional redevelopment plan, something I once thought was years out of reach. I was offered the role not in spite of my battle with the Caldwell Foundation, but because of it. Because I didn't fold. Because I didn't just survive. I exposed what needed to be seen. At the award banquet last month, the keynote speaker mentioned my name. Called me a woman who didn't just redesign neighborhoods, she redesigned the narrative. I didn't cry. I just smiled. Quietly. The way you do when you realize you've become someone your younger self would have admired. Last week, I found the sapphire ring in a drawer I hadn't opened in months. It was still in its velvet box, still gleaming like it had the night he gave it to me. I took it out. Not to wear it, just to say goodbye. I drove to the coast, back to the lighthouse where Nathan had proposed. The wind was high, the sky a deep orange. I stood on the same worn stones, held the ring in my hand, and whispered something only I could hear. Then I dropped it into the waves. Not out of bitterness, but release. Because not every love story ends in a wedding. Some end in awakening. And that, I've learned, is its own kind of vow. Now, when people ask if I regret it, leaving the man I once said yes to, breaking the mold, burning the plans, I say this: no. Because the life I'm living now wasn't born from fear or fantasy. It was built from truth, brick by brick, step by step. And every step away from him was a step back to myself. That, more than any ring, any dinner, any fairy tale, is my happily ever after.